The year is 1470. The Ottoman Empire, under the iron grip of Sultan Mehmed II, stands as one of the most formidable forces in history. Its vast territories stretch from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia, erasing the old world in its wake. But there are stories that remain untold, stories that have been buried in the dust of history, hidden from the eyes of those who would dare to uncover them. Among these stories is one that concerns a group of Christian nuns, whose lives were erased from memory by the very empire that claimed to conquer them. The setting is a remote convent high in the mountains of Thessaly, a peaceful place where women had sought solace and refuge for generations. But on this day in the year 1470, the bell that had tolled for centuries to call the nuns to prayer rings for the last time. The nuns, 23 women, each dedicated to a life of quiet devotion, kneel in prayer, their lips whispering the same prayers they had recited every morning for years. But today, the words taste different. The air is heavy with the foreboding sense of doom, the quiet dread of what is to come. Outside the stone walls, the Ottoman army advances like a river of steel and fire, erasing everything in its path. The forces under Sultan Mehmed are not marching in the traditional sense. They are flowing across the land, invading and erasing identities, conquering not just land, but the very soul of the people they subjugate. The women inside the convent, most of them young and untrained for battle, have no idea what is about to befall them. But Sister Alani, the abbess of the convent, understands. She feels it in her bones. She knows that their world is about to end. The Ottoman soldiers approach with a quiet authority, and yet there is something chilling in their presence. They are not just conquerors, they are erasers of history. Their goal is not to simply defeat these women, but to erase them from memory itself. And so it begins. What seems like a simple conquest is in fact a calculated attempt to eliminate the very identity of these Christian nuns. These women, who have lived their lives in silent devotion, will soon face something far worse than death. They will face the complete annihilation of their identity. Enter Agent Francis Dorr, a government investigator tasked with uncovering the hidden truth behind the disappearance of these nuns. Dorr's mission is simple: to discover why these women's stories were erased from the historical record. But when he arrives in Alexandria, Egypt, where the archives are kept, he finds himself tangled in a web of contradictions and missing logs. The official narrative is all too clean, all too simple. The nuns were either killed or converted, their fate sealed by the power of the Ottoman Empire. But Dorr feels something is missing. The records don't add up. The truth, he suspects, lies somewhere deeper. He begins his investigation, poring over the ancient documents, the scattered pieces of the puzzle that the Ottomans left behind. The first signs of a deeper conspiracy appear in an intercepted Ottoman memo, which refers to the nuns in a way that is unsettling. It speaks of the nuns being moved to unknown locations, their final fates left unclear, as though the Ottomans themselves were trying to disappear them from the world's memory. But what was the real reason behind this systematic erasure? Why was it so important to the Ottomans that these women, their faith, their lives, be wiped from the pages of history? As Dorr reads deeper into the reports, it becomes clear that the nuns' disappearance was not an accident. It was calculated, an act that had been planned long before the Ottomans set their sights on the convents of Eastern Europe. The further Dorr digs into the history, the more he uncovers the Ottomans' true method of control. The Ottomans did not just conquer lands and people. They conquered identities. The strategy was simple. If they could break the spirit of the people they conquered, they could erase any trace of their culture and faith. This is why the nuns' fate was so significant. To the Ottomans, they were not simply enemies. They were symbols of resistance, living reminders that there was still faith and defiance in a world that had already been reshaped by Ottoman conquest. These nuns, who prayed in Latin and who worshipped a different god, were the last vestiges of a Christian world that the Ottomans sought to obliterate. Dorr uncovers reports that show the method used by the Ottomans to suppress their faith was far more insidious than physical violence. The Ottomans did not simply slaughter their enemies. They silenced them, made them disappear in ways that could not create martyrs. There would be no resistance. There would be no songs or stories. The nuns would be forgotten, not through death, but through a method even more horrifying. They would be made to fade from history. As Dorr continues his investigation, the pieces begin to fall into place. He comes across references to a strategy the Ottomans used with other Christian communities they had subjugated, one that relied on psychological pressure rather than physical violence. The ritual of silence was imposed on the Christian communities in the conquered regions, forcing them to abandon their practices and submit to Ottoman control. But the nuns of the convent were different. They had not been broken by the psychological pressure of silence. They had remained strong in their faith, even in the face of the Ottoman siege. In their hearts, they refused to convert. The Ottomans had attempted to erase their identity, but in the silence that followed their fall, the nuns had hidden their resistance, in secret prayers, in carved crosses in hidden chambers, and in the silent defiance that echoed through the convent walls. Door's investigation becomes a race against time, as he tries to uncover the missing pieces of history before the final truth slips into the cracks of time. As he pieces together the final reports, he uncovers a haunting detail, a memo from an Ottoman commander, Mehmed Pasha, that shows the true extent of the Ottomans' systematic efforts to silence these Christian nuns. Their ultimate goal was not simply to conquer them, but to erase them from existence. The tone of the investigation is cold and methodical, and Door can feel the weight of what he's uncovered pressing on him. He knows this is only the beginning. There are more secrets hidden within these walls, more whispers from the past that are just waiting to be uncovered. But for now, the answers remain just beyond his reach. The investigation into the fate of the Christian nuns continues, and Agent Francis Door feels the weight of history pressing down on him. As he sifts through the records, one thing becomes undeniable. The Ottoman Empire didn't just invade lands. It invaded identities, erased memories, and sought to control the very essence of the people they conquered. This wasn't about conquest in the traditional sense. It was about obliterating resistance, and the nuns in the convent of St. Catherine were among the last living symbols of that resistance. In the year 1453, when Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, Sultan Mehmed II achieved what many considered an impossible feat. The city that had been the center of Christendom for over 1,000 years was now in Ottoman hands. The Hagia Sophia, once the greatest cathedral in the Christian world, was converted into a mosque within hours of the conquest. The bells that had once called people to prayer in the name of Christ were silenced, and the very symbols of the old world were erased. Mehmed understood something crucial. You don't just defeat a people by killing them, you defeat them by erasing their identity. This was the empire's goal. The Ottomans didn't just want land. They wanted control over every aspect of the lives of those they conquered, from religion to culture to history itself. As they expanded their rule, the Ottoman authorities implemented a systematic approach to erasing the identities of the Christians they dominated. Conversion was one of the key tools in this strategy, but for those who resisted, the empire employed a far more insidious tactic, the elimination of memory. Door begins to understand the true nature of the Ottoman strategy. The idea was simple. If they could break the spirit of resistance, particularly among religious communities, they could remove the memory of the old world. But it was not simply about physical suppression. It was about psychological domination. The Ottomans used a series of methods designed to obliterate the past, to turn communities into hollowed-out shells of their former selves. As Door delves deeper into the reports, he uncovers the full scale of this psychological warfare. The Christian nuns, who had once been pillars of their communities, symbols of devotion and resistance, were now treated as something less than human. Their lives were reduced to footnotes in Roman-like bureaucratic orders. The nuns were not to be honored as martyrs or even remembered as victims. They were to be forgotten, their names scrubbed from the historical record. It becomes clear that the Ottomans were not just concerned with defeating the people of Egypt and the wider Byzantine world. They were focused on erasing the cultural and spiritual heart of their enemies. For the nuns, their fate was sealed in a manner far more degrading than mere death. The Ottomans understood that by silencing their voices, they would leave no legacy for these women. In one of the most crucial breakthroughs of his investigation, Door uncovers a series of hidden documents in an Ottoman archive, buried beneath layers of official reports. These documents, encrypted and never intended for public consumption, provide a chilling glimpse into the methods the Ottomans used to keep their conquered peoples in check. The Ottoman commanders described in the records are not concerned with the physical destruction of their enemies. Instead, their focus is on psychological domination, forcing people into silence and obedience through fear, isolation, and manipulation. The documents show that the nuns in the convent were forced into ritualized silence, a psychological tactic designed to break their will to resist. These women, once active participants in the religious life of Egypt, were now trapped in a deadening silence, their voices silenced not by physical violence, but by a systematic attempt to wipe away their identities. Dor is disturbed by the implications. These women, the last bastion of Christian faith in a world dominated by Islam, were being erased not through physical torture, but through cultural suppression. The very act of erasing their voice, removing their names from the record, and forcing them into silence was a form of psychological torture, far more effective than simple physical violence. The Ottomans had perfected the art of breaking the spirit of their enemies without shedding blood. One particular document catches Dor's attention, a memo from Sultan Mehmed II himself, written to his commanders in 1470, detailing the silencing of the Christian nuns. The memo describes how the women were to be separated from their faith, and how their final days should not be seen as martyrdom, but as the inevitable end of a people who had refused to submit. The last part of the memo reads, "Let them remain silent. Let their prayers fade into nothing. Let them be forgotten by the world and their names erased from history. The last of the Christians in Egypt shall disappear, and with them their God." This memo is the final proof that the Ottomans did not just want to defeat their enemies. They wanted to ensure that their legacy would be erased, their faith silenced, and their memories erased from time itself. The nuns were to be stripped of their identity, their faith extinguished, their resistance buried in the sands of time. As Dor reads the final lines of the memo, he realizes the full scale of what he is uncovering. These nuns, these women who had lived their lives in silence, had now become the forgotten casualties of an empire that sought to control not just land, but memory itself. The Ottomans had succeeded in one of their most horrific conquests, the erasure of their enemies' very identity. In the final moments of his investigation, Dor pauses. The silence of the nuns, their erasure from history, weighs heavily on him. He knows that this case is far from over, that the truth behind the nuns' fate still lies hidden in the cracks of history. But for now, he is left with a chilling conclusion. The Ottomans did not just conquer the land of Egypt. They conquered its soul, its memory, and its identity. The final echoes of the nuns' resistance are almost gone, their prayers fading into the dark corridors of time. But Dor knows that somewhere deep within the Ottoman archives, the truth still waits to be uncovered. The investigation into the fate of the Christian nuns has unearthed dark truths about the Ottoman Empire's strategies of control, oppression, and erasure. Agent Francis Dor, having uncovered the extent of the psychological and cultural tactics employed by the Ottomans, finds himself drawn deeper into a historical mystery that was never meant to be solved. The nuns' legacy is fading fast, but there is a lingering question. What remains of their story, their resistance, their faith? The story of the Christian nuns, their identity erased by the Ottomans, is now understood in part. These women, who lived and died in silence, were not killed in the traditional sense. Their bodies were never buried, their graves were never marked, and their names were systematically erased from Ottoman records. What had been planned as their final obliteration became something else entirely. Dor's continued exploration of Ottoman documents leads him to a chilling revelation. While the nuns had been forgotten by history, their presence in the records was never completely wiped away. Fragments of their existence remain, scraps of handwritten prayers, carved crosses in the hidden chapels, and mentions in official reports that are eerily incomplete. The Ottomans had succeeded in many things, but they could not fully silence these women. Through the labyrinth of Ottoman military ledgers and bureaucratic records, Dor discovers something extraordinary. The Ottomans may have tried to erase their faith, but they could not erase the spirit of the nuns. Their resistance had been recorded in fragments, buried beneath layers of official propaganda and military reports. But the Ottomans had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated the power of memory. The key to understanding the true fate of these women lies in hidden documents discovered during a restoration project at the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. In 2011, archaeologists uncovered a forgotten chapel beneath the palace, a small, hidden room where the nuns had been kept, forgotten by the world. Within this room, they had carved crosses and Latin prayers into the walls, a silent testament to their faith and their refusal to be forgotten. As Dor examines the recovered artifacts from the chapel, he is struck by the significance of these marks. The nuns had lived in secrecy, working by day, praying by night, and marking their walls with the remnants of their faith. These crosses, these etched prayers, were not just symbols of resistance. They were an act of defiance against the empire that sought to erase them. One carving stands out above the rest, a small bird etched into the stone, surrounded by 23 lines, each representing a different nun. The carvings are unfinished, with some lines trailing off into oblivion. The silence of these unfinished marks is a stark reminder that, While the nuns may have been silenced physically, they had left their mark in ways that empires couldn't erase. As Dor delves deeper into the historical context of the nuns' resistance, he realizes that the true significance of their story lies in what they left behind. The Ottomans' goal was clear: to erase the memory of those who resisted them, to ensure that their legacy would not inspire future uprisings or defiance. But in their attempt to control history, they had created something far more powerful: the legacy of the forgotten nuns. The Ottoman strategy, intended to strip these women of their dignity and faith, had failed. The silence imposed on them became a form of resistance in itself. The scratches on the walls, the whispers of Latin prayers, and the etched crosses were a testament to the endurance of their faith. Even as their bodies disappeared, their spirit lived on in the silent marks they left behind. In the final moments of his investigation, Dor reflects on what he has uncovered. The Ottomans had tried to erase the identity of the Christian nuns, but their efforts were ultimately in vain. The nuns' resistance lives on in the walls, in the scratches, and in the whispers of their prayers. History may have tried to silence them, but their legacy survives in ways that even empires cannot control. The faint echoes of their prayers, their struggles, and their resistance reverberate through the centuries. The Ottomans may have erased their names from the records, but they could not erase the memory of these women. And that, in the end, is the real story.